There are moments when survival stops meaning escape and starts meaning denial. By the time Leto and I reached the emergency helm core, the Alecto had already committed to the turn. You could feel it underfoot. But this was not normal, because nobody at helm had ordered it, and because I knew, with the cold certainty reserved for things already too late, that the ship was not merely changing heading, it was aligning. The emergency helm core sat 2 decks below main operations, buried behind a maintenance corridor most crew never used, and a manual bulkhead whose wheel lock had to be turned by hand. Old fleet architecture. Redundant, ugly, difficult. Built in the years when command still assumed systems would fail, like machines, instead of deciding to cooperate with something else. Leto spun the wheel and hauled the hatch open with both hands. Inside, the compartment was smaller than people imagine when they hear the word helm. No grand bridge glass, no sweeping command arrays. Just a reinforced room wrapped around an analog control spindle, emergency attitude thrusters, engine choke safeties, and an old hardline navigation table with mechanical confirmation relays. The kind of station designed for a crew that had already lost the rest of the ship and needed one place where electronics had not yet become a religion. It should have felt safe. Instead, it smelled faintly sweet. Leto smelled it too. I saw it in the way her head angled before she stepped through the hatch. Tell me that's coolant. It isn't. She gave me the look people reserve for answers they already hate. The room lights were on, but dimmed irregularly, not flickering, breathing. The analog table at center glowed with route markers and current vectors in a steady amber arc. Good. That meant some part of the core was still independent. The outer manual status wheels showed helm lock half engaged and starboard trim authority drifting. The Alecto was still answering external pull. I sealed the hatch behind us and crossed to the table. Leto moved opposite me, weapon low, scanning corners, vent covers, pipe joints. There were only 6 places in that room a living thing could hide, and at least 20 a wrong thing might try. On the nav table, our assigned route line continued cleanly toward Bastion 12. Our actual vector did not. A second line, ghost white and unauthorized, peeled slowly off the lawful corridor and bent toward the dark where Iden Reach waited. Every few seconds, the system tried to snap the ghost line back to regulation, and every few seconds, something in the ship corrected it again, patiently, like a tutor moving a child's hand. I keyed into manual override. Denied. I tried again using emergency helm authority and command path severance. Denied. Not by the ship. By captain's authorization. Leto saw it on the display and went still. No? I did not answer, because I was already checking the source trace. Not bridge, not operations, not Sorin live confirmed. The command flag wore his credentials, but originated from 3 different pathways at once. One from Deck 4 sanitation control, one from the reservoir nexus, and one from a maintenance access node that had been physically stripped 2 years before I signed onto the Alecto. It was not just using his authority now, it was distributing him. Leto said it first. That's not him. No. But I heard how uncertain the word sounded, and so did she. That uncertainty was how it got in. Not through belief. Through the space belief leaves when it fractures. She stepped toward the hardline panel. Tell me there's a mechanical break. There is. And it will cut us blind. Meaning? Meaning no route compensation, no automated correction, no safe drift solution. If I sever helm from the main ship, we keep whatever momentum and angle we're holding at the moment of cut. If we're wrong, we tumble. Leto glanced once toward the sealed hatch, as if the answer might be waiting beyond it in the dark. Behind the walls, the low tone from the reservoir nexus rose another fraction. The entire compartment vibrated softly with it now. Not enough to shake tools. Enough to touch the fillings in old teeth. She said, "How long until the turn commits?" I ran the numbers twice because I did not trust my own hands. 7 minutes if the current drift holds. Can we stop it before then? Yes. Can we survive stopping it? I looked at the mechanical severance lever. Old steel, yellow-black hazard, striping worn down at the grip. The sort of device engineers love because it cannot be argued with once pulled. Maybe, I said. She accepted that with less drama than it deserved. That was Leto. Efficient, even in terror. She did not waste emotion on probabilities already counted. Then do it. I reached for the lever, and the hatch behind us spoke in Captain Soren's voice. Wait. We both turned. Not over intercom. Not through a speaker. Through the metal itself, resonance carrying a human pattern, imperfectly, but close enough to hit instinct before reason. Open the hatch, the voice said. You are about to kill propulsion. Leto raised her weapon. Captain, the metal answered at once. Leto, stand down. Vane doesn't understand what he's seeing. I should have spoken then. Should have said what we both knew. That the source path was wrong. That Soren could not be in the hatch. That anything using walls for a larynx had forfeited command long before it asked politely. Instead, I hesitated because the voice had found the exact fatigue in him. The quiet command pressure. The restrained irritation he used when somebody competent was about to do something stupid out of fear. Leto looked at me. There it was again. Permission. The chorus did not need obedience from all of us. Only delay. I forced myself to the board and checked life sign traces outside the core. 2 warm bodies in the maintenance corridor. 1 upright, 1 lower to the deck, perhaps kneeling, perhaps dragging damage. The sensors blurred around them as if the ship objected to precision. 2 contacts outside, I said. Leto kept the weapon on the hatch. Captain and who? I don't know. The voice changed tactic. Not Soren now. Dane. Open up, it said, rough and furious. We're running out of section control out here. Leto's jaw tightened. Then Wren's voice, gentle and dry from medbay memory. Please. It hurts to breathe. She shut her eyes once. Only once. When she opened them again, she was all function. No one opens that hatch, she said. Good, because I had finally regained enough of myself to pull diagnostic separation on the external voices. No comm source, no speaker source. Vibration path only. It was using the pipe network and structural ribs, turning the ship into a throat. I gripped the severance lever. The tone in the walls changed immediately. Not louder, more urgent. A system that had been patient had now recognized threat. On the nav board, the ghost course toward Iden Reach brightened, locking more aggressively against our assigned route. The ship was committing mass to the turn. Somewhere aft, thruster timing compensated. Somewhere else, I heard, felt, the bulk hydraulic shunt for starboard trim engage without authorization. Now, Leto said. I pulled. The lever resisted at first with old mechanical dignity, then gave all at once. Every light in the helm core went out. The tone died. For half a second there was perfect darkness and absolute silence. Then the emergency analog backup strips snapped on in a deep red line around the floor. The nav table rebooted into manual state. Outside the compartment, the Electo screamed. Not metaphorically, not in imagination. Metal under wrong load produces noises that become very difficult to distinguish from pain. Once enough human stakes attach themselves to them. The ship lurched hard to port as automated control severed mid-correction. Leto hit the wall. I went into the table edge hard enough to crack something in my shoulder. Tools spilled from a rack and clattered across the deck like bones. Then weight changed again. Not full spin. Worse, in some ways. A slow, unstable roll as the ship tried to remember what direction meant without the systems that had been speaking for it. I hauled myself upright and got manual attitude wheels under my hands before instinct could fail. Port trim, counterburst, stern correction, bleed momentum. Do not fight it clean. Old ship, hold together a little longer. Leto slammed the emergency clamps on the floor rails with one hand and caught the edge of the table with the other. Did it work? I looked at the route display. The ghost line toward Iden Reach had vanished. For one beautiful second I thought yes. Then the long-range passive scan lit up. Not from the ship. From outside. 3 bursts. Gap. 3 bursts. And every dead circuit aboard the Electo answered in pale little pulses across the systems map, despite severance, despite blackout, despite hardline isolation. The chorus had stopped steering through command architecture. Now it was steering through the hull. You can build ships to resist sabotage, decompression, fire, radiation, and vacuum. But once something learns the resonant habits of your frame, once it understands the exact frequencies at which a vessel prefers to flex, compensate, and settle, you no longer have a machine. You have an instrument. It's still turning, I said. Leto stared at the system map. How? Structure-coupled response. That means nothing. It means Iden Reach is pulling a reply through the ship's own body. She stared at me for half a second, as if deciding whether technical language had become a form of cowardice. Then, can you stop that? No good answer existed. Before I could offer a bad one, something struck the outer hatch. Not a fist, not a tool. A heavy, wet impact, followed by scraping. Leto raised the weapon again. A second impact came lower, dragging across the metal in a slow arc. Then Captain Sorin's voice, very clear now and very close. Leto, Elias, open the door. I know how to cut the signal. Blood loss, exhaustion, fear. Under other circumstances, any of those would have been enough to make hope dangerous. Under these circumstances, hope was simply another hostile system. I checked the thermal trace again. Still 2 bodies outside the hatch, one upright, one partially against the floor. The lower one moved oddly. Not injured, repositioning in little measured pulls. Then a third heat bloom appeared between them, where no body had entered from corridor approach, not appearing, resolving, as if the sensor had only just decided to admit it. Leto saw that too. 3 now. I said nothing. The scraping on the hatch continued. A voice began humming outside. At first I thought it was Ren again. Then I realized it was Harker. Not speaking. Humming a tune I had heard him murder 3 different ways in the engine bay during maintenance shifts, because he never knew the words to anything, but liked pretending he did. That is the worst thing the chorus learned quickly. Not language, texture. The useless habits by which the dead remain themselves. The humming stopped. Then Harker's voice said from the floor, small and polite, "It's dark in the water." Leto put 1 round through the hatch. The impact rang through the compartment. Silence followed. Then, from the other side, all 3 voices spoke together in perfect unison. "We know." The red emergency strips dimmed. The nav table flickered. Every manual dial in the compartment began rotating by itself. Not fast, just enough to indicate force from inside the systems they supposedly no longer trusted. Hydraulic pressure climbed. Port correction tried to reverse under my hand. Outside, Iden Reach brightened. The viewport feed in the corner monitor came alive without my permission, showing the structure now larger than before. Impossible, against all good sense, because we should have been drifting away from it, not closing distance. Radial arcs turned slowly around a hollow central dark. Signals moved along its surface in branching white pathways, converging and separating like thought. The whole thing resembled neither station nor ship. Built architecture implies habitation or work. This implied only function, reception. Leto looked at the screen and whispered, "How long has that been out there?" Too good a question. I pulled scan history and found exactly what I was afraid of. It had been there before our course change. Before Orpheus 9. The structure registered only in suppressed passive fragments at impossible distances, as if it had been pacing the route edge outside conventional notice, waiting for a ship marked enough to answer. "We didn't find it," I said. Leto tore her eyes from the screen. "What?" "It found a ship already listening." The false Sorin voice returned in the hatch. No urgency now. No pressure. Almost gentle. "You're misreading sequence, Vane." That froze both of us harder than shouting would have, because it had answered the thought, not the action. Leto moved beside me and killed the corner monitor with the butt of her weapon. Sparks snapped. The screen went dark. "Talk later," she said. "Survive first." Outside the hatch, the scraping began again. Inside the helm core, the ship continued its slow, unwilling turn. So I abandoned the idea of stopping the response cleanly and looked instead for uglier options. Emergency helm cores keep one category of mechanism for moments when flight is already less important than denial. Reactor choke interlocks, thrust asymmetry dumps, and hard purge routines that sacrifice sections of the ship's own capacity to break external control. Dangerous, primitive solutions, the kind that leave survivors drifting in crippled metal if they work at all. My hand stopped over one labeled mass bleed/reserve vent. Leto saw it. What does that do? It dumps stored water and reserve atmosphere from non-critical sections through emergency vent manifolds. She looked toward the hatch, then back to me. Quick mind, faster than people gave her credit for. Through the same network it's using. Yes. And to the outside? Yes. How much damage? A lot. Can the ship live? I thought of the reservoir nexus, of pale threads in the tanks, of the pipe-borne tapping beneath the decks. Then I answered honestly, maybe not. Another impact hit the hatch, harder this time. Bolts shrieked. A fourth thermal trace resolved outside. Then a fifth. The corridor beyond the helm core was filling. Leto gave the only answer available. Do it. I armed the bleed routine. Manual confirmation wheel. Pressure key. Final lock release. The system demanded Captain's live consent. Of course it did. I almost laughed. Then Captain Sorin gave it. Not through voice. Through credentials. Clean. Unspoofed. Bridge origin. Less than half a second old. Leto and I stared at the panel together. This time there was no sanitation reroute, no impossible maintenance path, no distributed nonsense through the pipes. Bridge. Captain Sorin. Valid. I remember the exact sensation then, because it was one of the few truly new ones left to us. The terror of a real answer arriving at exactly the wrong moment. Leto said, "Is it him?" I checked path integrity twice and hated the result both times. Yes. The hatch channel opened of its own accord. Sorin's real voice came through at last, thin under background alarms and distant metal strain. "Vane," he said. "Vent the reserves." I keyed the reply with hands that had stopped feeling like mine. "Captain, confirm identity." A pause. Then, "You broke my nose on Deck 5 during the fuel riot at Karen Port because I said your checksum standards were vanity." Leto looked at me. He was right. No one else aboard knew that. Not the exact port. Not the insult. Not that Sorin had later apologized by leaving a fresh mug on my board and never mentioning it again. The voice went on. Weaker now. "I'm in operations. The bridge is gone. It's inside life support and trying to open the mains to receive atmospheric equalization. If you vent the reserves now, you'll strip the carrier medium from half the ship. Carrier medium. Water. He had seen what we had seen. Maybe more. Leto asked the question I could not. "Captain, what's outside the hatch?" A dry sound came over the channel. It took me a moment to realize it was Sorin trying not to cough. Not crew anymore. Then gunfire in the background. Then Sorin again, harder now. "Vent it." I looked at the armed routine. One final action left. Leto braced herself against the table edge. The hatch began to buckle inward under rhythmic force. 5 heat signatures outside became 7. The Electo rolled another fraction toward the pull in the black. And somewhere beyond the hull, Iden Reach brightened along its inner ring like an eye beginning to open. I triggered the vent. Nothing happened for one endless second. Then the ship convulsed. Emergency manifolds blew open across 4 decks at once. Reserve water, condensation stores, grey system reclamation slush, and sections of held atmosphere tore through the pipe network in a roaring reverse flood. Pressure alarms detonated across every board. The scraping beyond the hatch became impact, then chaos. The thermal signatures outside shattered and vanished in the wash of violent depressurization moving through the corridor. Inside the helm core, every dial spun madly, then stopped. The low answer tone from the hull cut off mid-rise. On long-range passive, the return pulses from Iden Reach stuttered. For the first time since Orpheus 9, the Alecto felt like a ship again, rather than a message in transit. Leto let out one breath. Then the emergency board flashed a new warning across the analog line. Reservoir. Nexus breach failed to contain. Primary life support. Cascade in progress. I stared at it. The vent had hurt it, not killed it. And because the ship had resisted longer than its designers ever intended, because old vessels keep trying even while they die, the Alecto had chosen the only compensation left. It was rerouting emergency atmospheric priority to the one intact sealed block, with enough fluid reserve to sustain short-term life. The reservoir nexus. The nest. Which meant, within minutes, unless the cascade was stopped, the ship would begin feeding the chorus everything we had left. Leto read the warning over my shoulder. Tell me that's not what I think. It is. She looked at the bent hatch, the dark monitor, the dead red strips around the floor, and finally back at me. So part 5, she said, voice flat with exhaustion and rage, is us going into the lungs. I would like to tell you I answered her with something brave, something fitting. Instead, I looked at the warning, at the dwindling life support margin, at Iden Reach still waiting in the black, with its inner ring faintly luminous now. And I said the only truthful thing left to say. Yes. Because venting the reserves had bought us time. Nothing more. The chorus was wounded aboard the Alecto, but not severed. Outside, the greater structure had not turned away. And somewhere in operations, Captain Soren was still alive, just long enough to order us deeper into the part of the ship that had already begun learning how to breathe.